On a special edition of the recap, this is the Senator of Vermont, Bernie Sanders, with you here for this Week 8 recap. Nothing is different here, same as always, it is about the papers. So what do you say we get this started? One of the items that this recap will not contain, of course, will be Russian accents. We will not do any Russian accents during the duration of this recap. That is offensive to all the voters or future voters of this fantasy league. Another thing that will not be contained within this episode of the recaps are mother jokes. Unless, of course, we are addressing a disenfranchised mother of 17 who has to make a decision between the medicine and the rent. At that point, she has to get out into the streets and offer her services. And if a young man just so happens to pay her for these services, she will then have to get on her knees and tell herself, Andy's mother, it's now or never. And she proceeds to blow that dick and go nose to belly on his penis. Other than that, we will have no mother jokes on this episode of the recap. Now, I was invited to do this recap because of a friend, and no, not Team Bundy, although he is a phenomenal owner and we will get to him in a second. I was asked to come and do this recap because I have always considered myself to be a champion of the disenfranchised. It is a word that I love to say. Disenfranchised, concerns. I am a champion of that. I speak for the voiceless. And of course, in the words of Martin Luther King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. Thank you. So I was asked to come and do this recap because I had spoken to a friend, and I will introduce my friend in a second. My friend had a ton of concerns of instability, poor drafting, and fantasy duds. We will have to address this particular owner who has infringed upon the happiness, the well-being of my very next guest, who is my friend, and I want you to welcome warmly Championship Belt.
Belt.
So last week, you and I met, and we had a sit-down, and we talked about Orlando.
Belt.
Listen. The obscene picks that Orlando has made is in no way, shape, or form a reflection on champions in the past and champions to come in this fantasy league. And I just want to let you know, Belt, it is okay to cry on my shoulder. Vulnerability is as human as socialism. And once we abolish the top 1% of this league, we will get to paradise. We will get to that utopia. Yes, thank you. The tears in your eyes tells me that there is hope for the future. There is hope. But unfortunately, we will have to address the announcement that I am about to make. Championship Belt, thank you for stopping by. So the supposed champion of this league has pretty much taken a nosedive into obscurity. And of course, we are discussing Turtle Power, who at this very point has a record of 2-6 and is facing Child Please this week. Turtle Power is unfortunately not going to win a consecutive championship. Now, I will not go as far as to say that he is not going to make the playoffs. I would never make that assumption. I would never say that unless, of course, he loses to Child Please this week. Then it is a very serious conversation that we should have, and the concerns of the belt should then be addressed after Orlando is stripped of his championship belt. Thank you. I will make some recommendations to the commish by letting him know my fantasy team, the selections that I made in a league where I play with men that are far more influential and far more powerful than any of you pieces of shit in this league. All right, Orlando. The name of my fantasy team is Run the Jews, and the team is as follows. At quarterback, we have Gardner Minshew. I suggest you pick him up immediately. At kicker, we have Greg Zuerlein. That's Greg Zuerlein. These are my top two players because they are the only players that have played thus far this season. 80% of my starting lineup is the disenfranchised players, some of who do not get to play and others who have not been signed yet. So at running back, I have Zach Zenzer. He plays for the Cardinals. At my other running back, I have Alec Ingold. He plays for the Raiders. At tight end, Hayden Hurst. And the wide receivers, who are the most important parts of my team because they are both unsigned. And I am hoping that one day they will find employment, either part-time or full-time employment with benefits and a living wage. And they are, of course, Tanner Gentry and Jared Abadaris. And that concludes my fantasy team. You will notice that most of those names, if not all of those names, sound extremely Jewish, and that is partly the reason why I picked them. I picked them because I am Jewish. I am a Jewish man. I am Bernie Sanders. I am the senator of Vermont. I am Jewish, so I picked players that sound Jewish, and if all goes well, Gardner Minshew will lead us into fantasy prominence. These are my recommendations for Orlando. This team seems to be a lot more functional than your squad. But why did this happen to Orlando? Orlando is averaging 82.3 points a week. And of course, his most disappointing slot came from Davante Adams, who is the 60th ranked wide receiver, and he has been gone since week 4, and I hope he has been making a living wage ever since he has been off of the field. For one reason or another, the commish has decided to put his trust in Sony Michel, who was his third pick in the fantasy draft. He passed on Chris Carson, Aaron Jones, and Josh Jacobs in order to get to Sony Michel. Now, there is nothing wrong with Sony Michel. He is a very competent player. He is, if I'm not mistaken, the 14th ranked running back in the league. But the problem with him is Bill Belichick. There is something about Patriots players in general, unless you are discussing Tom Brady, where they cannot be trusted. And there is a certain fraction of your fantasy confidence that has to include some form of confidence that you have a amount of certainty that at the goal line, Sony Michel will get the ball, except with the New England Patriots is about 3 or 4 people. Thank you. So if you don't have that certainty, that confidence, I like saying that with certainty, it kind of sounds like concern or disenfranchised. If you don't have that certainty in that player, then there is no reason to draft that man so high. He drafted him 3rd. That is a awful pick. And at this point, I'm surprised that someone who has 2 championships, as Orlando does, of course he doesn't have 3, but someone who has 3 championships would be silly enough to actually go with the New England offensive players. Well, a offensive player who is not Tom Brady, and in other cases, Julian Edelman. So I have come here today to talk about these concerns of the championship belt and how Orlando will not be around to defend his championship. This is being officially called by the senator of Vermont, Bernie Sanders, live on your Week 8 recap. Orlando will not make the chip. I will not going as far as to say that he will not make the playoffs. There are so many shitty teams in this league that I could not fix myself to say that just yet, unless, of course, he loses to Child Please this week. Now, let's have a conversation about scoring, weekly percentages. As you know, I always take on the top 1%. I always go hard on the top 1%. That's what I do. I go hard against the top 1%. But in this case, we will go up against the top 50% of the league. The top scorers every week are as follows. At number 1, we have Paul Thomasy, who averages 111.2 points, a 0.1 point a week. Andy with 106.5. Team Bundy. I'm not sure how he says it exactly. But Team Bundy with 96.8. Jay with 96.2 and Ed with 95.1, and they make up the top 50% of the fantasy league. Thank you. Now, the bottom half, the half that I empathize with the most, I feel sorry for them. They are not men of power in this league. They are run-of-the-mill. They are the runt of the litter. They are terrible, and they are as follows. We have Eric, who averages 83.2, and then I won't mention the men in the middle, and I'll just let you know that Pedro is at the bottom with 8.7. The other people in the middle aren't even worth mentioning. I'm just going to give you 83.2 and 80.7. It's just been that bad. Pedro has just amassed 100 points for the very first time this season with his 124-point performance. The 100-point scoring list is as follows. Paul with 5. Then we have Andy with 6. Team Bundy with 4. Jay with 3. Ed with 3. Hensel with 1. Eric with 2. Joe with 2. Dro with 1. And drum roll. My voice is getting hoarse. I think I need to drink some Metamucil. That wouldn't make any sense. Metamucil's like fiber. The worst, well, not the worst. I went a little too far on that one. The only team that has not yet scored 100 points is Orlando, thus extending the amount of concern that I have for Championship Belt, who is still crying in the corner because Orlando is his champion. The only team not to score 100 points is Orlando. How do you expect to beat anyone in this league if you can't score over 100 points? But this is how pathetic the 6 through 10 teams are. It's Eric at the top with 83%, and then the amount is so small, and it gets to Pedro with 80.7. Worthless players, worthless teams that aren't even worth mentioning. And I think I could even go as far as to say that I've grown an amount of contempt while delivering this recap. And although I came here to the aid of Championship Belt, I am now in a very contemptuous mood. So what do you say we finish this thing up? I also would like to inform you that November 5th at 3 a.m. is the actual trade deadline. I think you should make all of your trades, get all your ducks in a row, do all the crossing of the T's and dotting of the I's, and do everything that you have to do to put your team in a better position. We have not seen a trade yet this year, but once again, the trade deadline is November 15th. That is November 15th. That's about 2 weeks from now at 3 a.m., which of course for Pedro would be 12 midnight. Let's move on to the Week 7 scores. We have Team Bundy defeating Fuck You 78-265. Of course, Travis Kelce finally waking up with 12 points. We had the Jags defense with 15 and Kirk Cousins with 11 points. We have Jego Papa defeating Ewok Rape 132 points to 96. Jego Papa walks away with the Kirk Cameron Award for Fantasy Excellence, though I'm not quite sure if I agree with that because he is not a Jewish person. We should name this award after the Woody Allen Award for Fantasy Excellence. That is what we should do, honestly, in all honesty. Or Larry David, some other funny, famous Jew out there. I'm not quite sure why a conservative Christian man is the beacon of fantasy excellence. It is quite offensive. And also, Team Fuck You walked away with the Child Please Award with his 65 points. We also had New York to Cali winning 124 to Dad Bod's 114. A very high scoring matchup, 35 points from Tevin Coleman. I'm not even sure if that is his name. We also had Cooper Kupp getting 28 points and Lavarius Murray scoring 27 points. So for the very first time this season, Pedro enjoys a 3-digit score. Orlando, not so much. Rolo Thomasy loses to Child Please 102 to 95. And the Pineapple Jugglers are victorious against the Green Ranger 119 to 82. Finally, Mike Evans does something. He brings something to the table. Of course, we know this. What it means for Joe will mean that in a couple of weeks he will do nothing. He will produce nothing. He will get 5-point performances, and then Joe will just go away as Joe is supposed to go away. Let's move on to the Week 9 scores. We have Paul Thomasy going up against Andy, and this is a very pivotal matchup. We obviously have the two best teams statistically in the league at 6-2 apiece, and we have Orlando going up against Ed. Orlando with a record of 2-6, and Ed with a record of 6-2. Eric and Dro. Eric at 3-5, Dro at 5-3. He is the luckiest man in the league. That man has a clover leaf in his fucking butthole, as lucky as he has been. Though I could make some sort of a joke that is connected to his height and leprechauns and the stereotype of luck and rainbows, so it would be a gay midget and luck joke all in one, but I'm not that talented. No, thank you. That was a pity clap. You do not have to give me pity claps. We also have Hensel at 3-5 going up against Jay at 4-4, and Team Bundy at 3-5 up against Joe at 2-6. What can we say about Team Bundy? Well, we can say this. We could say that if the playoffs started today, Team Bundy would be the 6th ranked team. He would be going up against Jego Papa. And Dad Bod would be going up against Nida Khalid, New York to Cali, I'm sorry, in the 5th and 4th slot. So that much we can say about Team Bundy, who was in the bottom of the league weeks ago and is now representing his division like Paul wasn't able to this last week, representing his division in the playoffs. So this was a lot of fun, but as always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room, unless those quarterbacks' mothers are disenfranchised mothers of about 7 who have to blow dicks like Andy's mother. May your wide receivers pull their hamstrings, and may your running backs get arrested for marijuana possession. And I know I fucked that up because really it's the wide receivers that have to... You understand. Go fuck yourselves.